The last thing Linda Taylor expected to do at a stranger's wedding was tackle the groom. The second to last thing was stab him with a needle in front of 300 people. And yet, here she was, on the marble floor of the most expensive venue she had ever worked, one knee on either side of a man she had never met, an EpiPen in her hand, and a bride screaming at a pitch that was genuinely impressive. So, 45 minutes earlier. The wedding coordinator had given Linda Taylor exactly 3 instructions. Shoot the florals, shoot the cake, don't talk to anyone. Linda had been a luxury event photographer for 11 years. She knew how to blend in, keep quiet, and deliver stunning images of events she personally found exhausting. So when the coordinator, a thin woman with a headset and the energy of someone who hadn't slept since Wednesday, gave her those 3 instructions, Linda nodded pleasantly and thought, something is wrong with this wedding. It wasn't the chandeliers, though they were excessive. It wasn't the flowers. It wasn't even the bride, Han Soo-jin, who stood near the altar looking like a woman who had never once experienced an inconvenient emotion. It was the coordinator's eyes. They moved too fast, checked exits, tracked staff. Minimal questions, she had said. In Linda's experience, the only people who said that were people who didn't want you finding answers. The cake table was set up in an anteroom just off the main hall. A 5-tier structure in white and gold that probably had its own publicist. Linda set up her shot, checked her light, and reached out of pure professional habit to note the frosting texture for her event report. She dipped one finger, tasted. Her throat tightened within seconds. Not dramatically, not like the movies. It was quieter, a slow closing, like a door easing shut. Linda had felt this exactly once before, at 16, and that single experience had made her the most prepared person in any room ever since. Her hand was already in her bag. She always carried 2. Old habit, born from one very bad afternoon at 16. EpiPen out, cap off, click. She held it against her thigh and breathed deliberately while the epinephrine worked. 20 seconds, 30. Her throat relaxed. She stood upright. And that was when she saw the labels, 2 of them, same order number, different ingredient lists, sitting side by side on the prep counter like someone had forgotten to hide the evidence. The first label was clean, standard ingredients, no allergen flags. The second had the same base list, and then, in small print, peanut flour substituted in base layer per executive request. Linda looked at the cake, then at the order confirmation at the top of the label. Client, Lee Sol-ki, medical note on file, severe peanut allergy. She set the paper down very carefully, the way you handled something that might explode. Across the room, a staff member, in a white catering jacket, was moving toward the cake with a sealed transport box, moving with purpose, moving like someone with a task, a timeline, and absolutely no interest in being watched. Hey, Linda stepped into his path. Why are there 2 versions of this order? He stopped. The pause lasted a beat too long. Last-minute executive change. From which executive? Another pause. I'm not sure. He was sure. Linda had photographed enough people to know the difference between someone who didn't know something and someone performing not knowing. She stepped aside, watched him carry the box out through the service entrance, and then grabbed her camera bag and ran. She had not planned on attending the ceremony. She had planned on finding the coordinator, explaining what she'd found, and letting someone with actual authority handle it. But the coordinator was gone. Security had a line, and the groom, the man whose name was on that label, the man with a severe peanut allergy, was standing at an altar less than 50 meters away. She could see him from here, still composed, watching the room the way people did when they were waiting for something specific to happen. Then she heard it announced over the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be moving the cake ceremony forward. Linda stopped calculating and started moving. She didn't have a plan. She had a camera bag, an empty EpiPen, and the particular kind of resolve that comes from knowing something terrible is about to happen to someone who doesn't deserve it. She slipped past a distracted usher, cut through the standing guests near the back, emerged into the open aisle just as the groom lifted a fork. "Stop!" Her voice came out louder than she intended. "Don't eat that!" 300 heads turned. The groom's eyes found her immediately, sharp, dark, completely focused. And she noticed in the half-second before she started running that he did not look surprised. He looked like a man confirming something he already suspected. She tackled him anyway. They went down hard. The fork clattered across the marble. The room erupted. She was already pulling the second EpiPen from her bag when she heard the bride's voice cut clean through the chaos. "Are you insane?" Linda ignored all of it. "Stay with me." She got the injection in. "Don't you dare pass out on me." The groom looked up at her from the floor. His tie was crooked. His expression was unreadable. Then, very quietly, he said, "You're late." Linda stared at him. "Hi, besties. Welcome to Afro-Korean series channel. It's so lovely to have you here. Thanks for listening." The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes. Sul-ki was sitting upright by the time they reached him, which, based on the looks on their faces, was not what they expected to find. He had straightened his tie. He was speaking quietly into his phone. He looked less like a man who had just survived an assassination attempt and more like a man who was mildly inconvenienced by his schedule. Linda sat on the floor 3 feet away, back against the altar steps, and watched him with the particular expression she reserved for things she could not explain. "You're welcome," she said. He glanced at her briefly. "I didn't thank you." "I know. That's why I said it." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. Not a smile. He went back to his phone. The next 2 hours were controlled chaos. Police arrived. Statements were taken. The wedding guests, Korea's most powerful, most connected, most easily offended, were escorted out in stages, murmuring behind their hands. The cake was bagged as evidence. The catering staff were separated and questioned in different rooms. Han Soo-jin stood at the center of it all, perfectly composed, speaking to investigators, in a voice so calm it was almost offensive. She had changed the narrative within minutes. A disturbed intruder, a traumatic incident, her poor fiancé nearly injured by a reckless stranger. Linda watched her work and felt the particular chill of recognizing someone very good at something very dangerous. Then Soo-jin caught her looking, held it 1 second too long, and turned away first. A detective approached Linda for the 3rd time, young, tired, holding a notepad like it had personally wronged him. "Ms. Taylor, you're saying you discovered the labels in the prep room?" "Yes." "And you consumed some of the frosting yourself?" "Accidentally, yes." "And you carry 2 EpiPens?" "I have a severe peanut allergy. So does the groom." Coincidence of the century, lucky for him. The detective wrote something down. Linda had the distinct feeling it was not complimentary. Across the room, Sul-ki finished his call. He said something to the lead investigator, quiet, direct, and the entire energy of the room shifted slightly. The way energy shifted when someone with real authority entered a conversation. Linda filed that away. It was nearly midnight when a man she hadn't seen before appeared at her elbow. Compact, sharp-eyed, with the specific expression of someone who found the world consistently disappointing. "Ms. Taylor," he held out a card. "I'm Detective Kang Jun-ho. I work with Mr. Lee." She looked at the card, then at him. Work with him, or work for him? Jun-ho considered this. "Both. Honest. I appreciate that." She pocketed the card. "What does Mr. Lee want?" "To speak with you, privately." "It's midnight. He's aware. Linda looked across the room to where Seol-ki stood. He wasn't looking at her. He was reviewing something on his phone. But she had the distinct impression he knew exactly where she was. "Fine," she said. The private room was small, quiet, and had definitely been swept for recording devices recently. She could tell by the way Junho checked the corners before he left them alone. Seol-ki sat across from her. No tie now, jacket off. For the first time all evening, he looked like a person instead of a performance. "You found the labels," he said. "Yes." "You understood what they meant immediately." "I have a peanut allergy. The math wasn't complicated." He studied her the way people studied documents, thoroughly, without apology. "You could have called security." Security had a line. "You could have called the police." There wasn't time. "So you tackled me." "I saved your life." "Yes." A pause. "You did." It wasn't a thank you exactly, but coming from him, Linda suspected it was the closest equivalent. She leaned forward. "Your turn. You said I was late, which means you were expecting something, which means you knew." Silence. "Mr. Lee?" "I suspected," he said finally. "I had a private medical team nearby. I did not anticipate the cake specifically. You were going to let yourself have a reaction." "A controlled one." Linda stared at him. "That is genuinely the most reckless thing I've ever heard, and I once photographed a wedding where the groom arrived by zip line." "I needed confirmation," he said, "of the method, of who gave the order." "And did you get it?" "Yes." His eyes met hers directly. So did someone else. The air in the room changed. "Meaning what?" Linda asked. "Meaning you were seen, meaning you found evidence before it could be removed." He paused. "Meaning you are no longer a bystander." Linda thought about Soo-jin's eyes finding hers across the hall. The way she had paused, just briefly, before turning away. "She knows who I am," Linda said. "Yes." "How much danger am I in?" Seol-ki looked at her steadily. "Enough that I'd like you to not be alone tonight." Linda opened her mouth, closed it. "That is not," he added carefully, "what it sounded like." "It better not be," she said. "We just met on the floor." The hotel was discreet, expensive, and according to Seol-ki, secure enough for the immediate situation. Linda had 3 translations for that phrase by the time the elevator doors closed. "Immediate situation," she said. "That's doing a lot of work. It's accurate, it's vague. Also accurate." Junho had arranged 2 adjoining rooms, which Linda appreciated until she discovered the connecting door had a lock on his side only. She stood in the doorway between them, looked at the lock, looked at him, and decided not to ask. She had survived 11 years of difficult clients. She could survive one door. Her room was perfectly fine. Clean lines, good light, a window with a view of the city she was too tired to appreciate. She sat on the edge of the bed and ran through the evening in her head, the way she ran through shot lists, methodically, looking for gaps. She had stumbled into something large. That much was clear. What was less clear was why a man like Lee, Seol-ki, composed, connected, apparently accustomed to assassination attempts, was keeping her close instead of cutting her loose. She was a photographer from Atlanta. She had no leverage, no connections in Seoul, no particular value to anyone involved, except she had seen the labels, and Soo-jin knew it. Her phone buzzed. Her best friend Diane, calling from Chicago at what was, Linda did some math, genuinely an unreasonable hour. She answered anyway. "Tell me everything," Diane said immediately. "I saw something on Korean Twitter." "You don't speak Korean." "The picture's translated fine. Why are you on the floor of a wedding venue on top of a man?" "I saved his life." "Is he cute?" "Diane." Simple question, Linda. Linda looked at the connecting door. "That is not the relevant." "So yes." "Good night, Diane." She hung up, stared at the ceiling, thought about calling her mother, and immediately decided against it. Some conversations required energy, she did. not currently have. At some point she must have slept, because she woke to knocking. Not the door to the hallway, the connecting door. She checked the time. 6:42. Mr. Lee? There's coffee, a pause, and a situation. She opened the door. He was already dressed, fully, immaculately, like a man who had either slept in his suit or didn't sleep at all. He held 2 cups of coffee and was looking at his phone with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of concerned. She took the coffee without comment. What situation? He turned his phone toward her. It was a video clip, shaky phone-shot footage from the wedding. Edited, she could see the cuts, to show only her running down the aisle and tackling him. The allergic reaction had been removed entirely. The EpiPen was gone. What remained was 40 seconds of a woman violently taking down a groom at his own wedding. The caption read, "Who is she? Foreign woman attacks Korean CEO at alta.**. It had 4 million views. Linda stared at it for a long moment. Well, she said, yes. That's a problem. Several problems. Your name is in the comments, your website, your business address in Atlanta. He took his phone back. Posted 40 minutes ago by an account created yesterday. Sujin. Her people. She doesn't do anything directly. Linda drank her coffee. It was good coffee. Of course it was. And she used the 30 seconds it took to finish half the cup to think rather than react. Reacting was how people made situations worse. She had learned that the hard way at 23, and the lesson had stuck. My contracts, she said. 3 cancellations already. I had Junho check. She looked at him. You had Junho check my contracts before you told me. I wanted complete information before the conversation. That is a very particular way to operate. It's efficient. It's controlling. A beat. Also efficient. Despite everything, she almost laughed. They ate breakfast at the small table by his window. Room service, quiet. The city waking up below them. It should have been awkward. Somehow it wasn't. You were an investigative journalist, she said, before the company. Yes. So this, the conspiracy, the evidence, the controlled exposure. This is how you used to work. Largely. And now someone is using it against you. He set down his cup. Sujin's family has been moving against my company for 8 months. The wedding was the final step. A merger that looked voluntary. He paused. It was not going to be voluntary. Linda absorbed that. So you staged the whole thing, the wedding, the reaction, to catch her. To document her, there's a difference. And I walked into the middle of it. You ran, he corrected. Into the middle of it. She pointed at him. Do not make me regret saving your life. Something settled in his expression then, quieter than his usual composure. More genuine. You won't, he said. The problem with being in danger, Linda had discovered, was that it didn't pause for personal inconvenience. It didn't pause when she needed to reschedule 4 clients. It didn't pause when she had to explain to her landlord, via a very careful text, that she might be delayed returning to Atlanta. It didn't pause when Diane called back at 7 in the morning Chicago time, which meant she had set an alarm specifically to call, which meant the Korean Twitter situation had escalated. His name is Lee Sul-ki, Diane said. He was an investigative journalist. He dismantled 3 government corruption cases in 5 years. He's been on 2 magazine covers. A pause. Linda, 2 covers. I'm aware of who he is. Are you aware that he's... Diane? I'm just saying the photos don't do him justice. I'm hanging up. Call me when you're safe, or when something happens, whichever comes first. Linda hung up and looked across the car at Sul-ki, who was driving with the focused calm of someone who had absolutely not heard any of that. He had definitely heard all of that. Not a word, she said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were thinking something. I'm always thinking something. She turned to look out the window. Outside, Seoul moved past in morning light. Dense, vivid, nothing like Atlanta. She had been here once before, years ago, for a corporate shoot. She had eaten well and seen almost nothing. She made a private note to fix that if she survived the week. Junho had identified a financial trail. Not proof, not yet, but a thread. A series of transfers between shell companies that connected Soo Jin's family holdings to the catering firm that had handled the wedding. If they could trace it one level deeper, they had documented intent, which required surveillance. Which was how Linda found herself in a parked car outside a glass office building at 10 in the morning, sharing a container of convenience store kimbap with a man she had known for less than 24 hours. "You've done this before," she said. "The waiting?" "Many times. Doesn't it drive you insane?" "No." She ate a piece of kimbap. It was better than it had any right to be, given that it came from a gas station equivalent. "What do you think about, while you wait?" He was quiet for a moment. "The gaps." "What gaps?" "In the information. What I know versus what I can prove. The distance between the two." He glanced at her briefly. "What do you think about?" "Honestly, right now I'm thinking about the fact that I'm doing surveillance in yesterday's clothes because someone tried to kill you and I didn't have time to pack a bag." A pause. "I can have clothes sent," he said. "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "The point is..." She stopped, looked at him. "Never mind. You'll write it down as a variable." "Probably," he admitted. She laughed despite herself. He watched her laugh with the careful attention of someone filing something away for later, and then looked back at the building with an expression she couldn't quite read. The target emerged at 11:15. Not Soo Jin, a financial officer, mid-level, nervous energy, the kind of man who checked his phone every 40 seconds. He met someone at a coffee cart across the street. Brief exchange. Something passed between them that was not coffee. Seol-ki had his camera up before Linda registered what was happening. She watched him work. Efficient, unhurried, completely still in the way that predators were still. Not passive, but coiled. She understood suddenly why he had been good at journalism. He didn't impose himself on a situation. He waited for the situation to reveal itself. "Got it," he said quietly. "What was that?" "A drive. Physical transfer. They know digital leaves traces." He lowered the camera. "It confirms the connection. Not enough alone, but enough to build from." "So they're..." "Careful," Linda said. "Which means they've done this before." "Yes. So what now?" "Now Junho traces the officer." He started the car. "And we don't go back to the hotel the same way we left." Linda looked at him. "Are we being followed?" "Possibly. You say that very calmly. Panic doesn't help. Neither does pretending everything is fine." "I'm not pretending," he checked the mirror. "I'm managing." Linda decided that was either the most reassuring or most terrifying thing she'd heard all day. She hadn't determined which yet. They pulled into traffic. He drove without GPS, memorized routes, she realized. He had planned this before they left. "You planned the whole day," she said. "Yes. Including me?" A beat. "I planned for a companion. I didn't plan for you specifically." "That is the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." A beat. "I wasn't being romantic." "I know. That's the problem." She looked away before he could respond. Outside, Seoul kept moving. Somewhere behind them, possibly, someone was watching. And somehow, despite all of it, Linda realized she wasn't scared. She wasn't sure yet whether that was his influence or a problem. Junho found the second layer on a Tuesday. Linda was editing photos on her laptop, old client work, the kind of task that required just enough focus to keep her hands busy without occupying the part of her brain that kept returning to the same set of unanswered questions. when he walked into the hotel room and set a folder on the table without preamble. Seol-ki looked up from his desk. "How deep?" he said. "Deeper than the catering firm." Junho pulled out a chair. "The shell companies trace back 18 months, before the engagement, before the merger talks." He paused. "This was never about the wedding." Linda stopped editing. "The wedding was just the method," Seol-ki said. "It wasn't a question." "The wedding was the exit," Junho said. "Clean, public, natural looking. Grieving fiancé inherits controlling interest during the mourning period. Board doesn't question it, media covers the tragedy." He closed the folder. By the time anyone looked closely, it would already be done. The room was quiet for a moment. "That's elegant," Linda said. Both men looked at her. "I mean, horrible, obviously horrible, but clean." Junho stared at her. "She's not wrong," Seol-ki said. "The files took 3 hours to work through. Linda wasn't supposed to be involved. She understood that. She was a photographer, not an investigator. And this was not her case or her country or her problem, beyond the unfortunate fact that someone had decided she was a loose end. But she had good eyes, 11 years of noticing details other people missed. And somewhere around the second hour, while Seol-ki and Junho were focused on the financial thread, she found something else. "This transfer," she said, "this one here." Seol-ki leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she was briefly, inconveniently aware of how close. "What about it?" "The timestamp. It's 3 hours after the contract was signed with the catering company. But the modification order, the one, changing the ingredients, that's dated 2 days before." She looked up at him. "Someone placed the order before the contract existed." Silence. "Which means," Junho said slowly, "there's a second contact inside the catering firm, someone who was already in place." "Someone who didn't need the contract," Seol-ki said, "because they already had the access." He was still leaning over her shoulder. She watched his expression shift, the focused stillness of someone rearranging a mental map, and felt the particular satisfaction of having contributed something real. "Good eyes," he said quietly. It was directed at the document, but he was looking at her. Junho left at 9. The room settled into the particular quiet of two people who had been in close quarters long enough that silence no longer required explanation. Linda made tea, chamomile, from the hotel amenity basket and sat across from Seol-ki while he reviewed the files one more time. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You'll ask regardless." "True." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Why did you agree to the wedding? If you suspected her family for months, why go through with it that far?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because suspicion isn't evidence," he said finally, "and because I needed them to commit fully before I could move." He set down the file. Walking away earlier would have scattered them. They would have found another method, another timing. "So you let it get to the altar?" "Yes." "That required a significant amount of cold blood." "It required patience." "Same thing in your case." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite agreement. "It cost more than I expected," he said. "The performance of it." Linda looked at him. That was the most personal thing he had said since the anteroom at the wedding. She recognized it for what it was. Not a complaint, just an admission. The kind that slipped out when someone was tired enough to stop managing. "For what it's worth," she said, "you were convincing." "That's not entirely a compliment." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones, less comfortable, more honest. His phone buzzed. He read it, and the stillness that came over him was a different kind entirely, not composed, alert. "What?" Linda said. He turned the phone toward her. A text. Unknown number. 4 words. "She knows where you are." Linda set down her tea very carefully. "How?" she said. Someone talked. His voice was even. His eyes were not. Or someone followed us better than I accounted for. So what do we do? He was already standing, already moving. We leave, he said. Now. Linda grabbed her camera bag, first instinct every time, and followed him to the door. You know, she said, pulling on her jacket, normal people take city breaks for fun. He paused at the door, checked the corridor, looked back at her. Is that what you'd prefer? At this point, she met his eyes. Ask me when we're not running. His expression did the thing again, almost a smile. Then they moved. They drove for 40 minutes before Sulki was satisfied they weren't being followed. Linda had stopped asking questions around minute 20, not because she had run out, she had approximately 40, but because he was doing the thing where he counted side streets under his breath, and interrupting that seemed inadvisable. He pulled into an underground car park beneath an unremarkable building in a part of the city that didn't appear on tourist maps. Junho's secondary location, he said. He has a secondary location. He has 4. Linda unbuckled her seatbelt. I want to meet whoever raised that man. The secondary location was a clean, sparse apartment on the 3rd floor. 2 rooms, no decoration, the kind of space that existed purely to function. Junho was already there, laptop open, looking like someone who had not experienced surprise in several years. Clean route? He asked. Clean enough, Sulki said. Junho looked at Linda, then at Sulki, then back at Linda with the particular expression of a man assembling information he had not requested but was receiving anyway. I'll take the couch, Junho said. You don't have to, Linda started. I want to, he said firmly. I very much want to. She looked at Sulki. He was already setting his jacket over a chair, expressionless. There's 1 bedroom, he said. You take it. Where will you sleep? I don't sleep much. That's not an answer. It's accurate. Linda pressed 2 fingers to her temple. You and accurate. You really have a thing. I find precision useful. I find a full night's sleep useful. Some of us are built differently. Junho made a sound that was almost a laugh. Both of them looked at him. He was suddenly very interested in his laptop screen. She called Diane at midnight. Not because she had anything new to report, but because keeping Diane uninformed was its own kind of dangerous. Secondary location, Diane repeated. Like a safe house. Exactly like a safe house. Linda, I know. You are living in a K-drama. I'm aware of that, Diane. Does he do the thing, where he stands very close and says something intense with no context? Linda looked at the closed bedroom door, thought about the car, the files. Good eyes. We're focusing on not getting killed, she said. That's a yes. Good night, Diane. She couldn't sleep. This was not surprising. What was surprising was that when she opened the bedroom door at 2 a.m, Sulki was sitting at the small table with a case file, a cup of coffee, and the focused expression of a man who considered rest optional. He looked up. Couldn't sleep, she said. I know, I heard you. The walls are thin. Yes? She sat across from him uninvited. He didn't object. She pulled the file toward her, and he let her, which she was beginning to understand, was its own form of trust from a man who controlled every variable he could reach. Talk me through it, she said. All of it. From the beginning. He looked at her for a moment. Then he did. It took an hour, 18 months of suspicion, documented patterns, financial irregularities that looked like accidents until you lined them up. 3 attempts to approach the story through legitimate channels, all quietly redirected. The decision to go in from the inside instead. Linda listened without interrupting. She was good at that. Photographers learned to be still, to let moments develop without interference. When he finished, the coffee was cold and the city outside was doing the particular thing cities did at 3 a.m. Not quiet exactly, but honest. You've been carrying this alone, she said. Junho knows. Junho is your colleague. That's not the same thing. He looked at her. No, he said. It isn't. A beat passed between them that had weight to it. I found something, she said. Before we left the hotel, I didn't mention it because we were running, but she pulled out her phone, showed him a photo she had taken of one of the documents. This name, it appears twice, in different company registrations, 18 months apart, with different roles listed. He leaned forward, studied it. That's the link, he said quietly. Between the shell company and the catering contact. That's what we were missing. I know. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression, past the composure, past the management, something that was simply and directly grateful. Linda. It was the first time he had used her name. She felt it land somewhere it probably shouldn't. Don't, she said. I'm still annoyed about the contracts. I know. And the fact that you planned for a companion like I was a logistical variable. I regret that particular phrasing. You should. But she was almost smiling, and he was watching her almost smile, with the careful attention she had noticed before. The filing away look, except this time it felt less like documentation and more like something else entirely. His phone buzzed. Junho, one line, second contact identified. We have enough. But Soo Jin called a press conference tomorrow morning. Linda read it, looked up. So it ends tomorrow, she said. Or it escalates. Helpful, thank you. Linda. What? A pause, longer than his usual ones. I'm glad you ran. She held his gaze for one moment. Me too, she said. Then she went back to bed before either of them could ruin it. The press conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning. It was currently 6:45. Linda knew this because she had been awake since 5, sitting at the small table with Junho's files spread in front of her and a cup of tea she had stopped drinking an hour ago. Seol-ki was on a call in the corridor. Junho was doing something with a laptop that involved a lot of quiet, focused typing and occasional expressions of grim satisfaction. She had learned to read Junho's expressions over the past 2 days. Grim satisfaction meant progress. Blank neutrality meant problems. The one time he had looked genuinely surprised, a witness had recanted. Right now, he looked grimly satisfied. She went back to the files. The problem was volume. They had enough to open an investigation. Junho had said so last night. But opening an investigation and stopping a press conference were different things. And Soo-jin's press conference wasn't just a narrative play, it was a closing move. Whatever she said this morning would become the version of events that existed before the counter-evidence could surface. Grieving fiancé, traumatic incident, unstable foreign woman. Linda had seen the comment sections. She knew how that story landed. She turned another page. And stopped. It was a subsidiary filing, third tier removed from the primary shell company, buried in a stack of documents that were clearly intended to be boring. The kind of paperwork that existed to exhaust anyone who got close enough to look. The registered agent was a law firm. The law firm's senior partner had a name Linda recognized, not from the files, from Seol-ki's company. She sat very still for a moment. The way she sat when she had a shot framed perfectly and needed her hands to be absolutely steady before she pressed the shutter. Then she stood up. Junho. He looked up immediately, read her face, closed his laptop. Show me, he said. She showed him. He looked at it, looked, for 45 seconds without speaking, which, she had learned, was Junho's equivalent of a loud reaction. This places the firm inside Seol-ki's company, he said, as a registered agent for the subsidiary, which means someone with internal access facilitated the shell structure. He was already reaching for his phone. This isn't just Soo-jin's family moving against him from outside. There's someone inside, Linda said. Was inside, past tense, if we move quickly. He stood. I need to call someone, don't touch anything. He went to the corridor. Linda stood alone in the room with the files and the particular feeling of having pulled a thread that unraveled something larger than expected. She heard the corridor door open behind her. Seulki. She turned. His call had clearly just ended. He still had his phone in his hand, and he was reading her expression with the focused efficiency she had come to expect. What happened? He said. She showed him the filing. She watched his face as he read it, watched the careful composure hold, and then, just briefly, not hold, a muscle in his jaw, a stillness that was different from his usual stillness. You recognize the firm, she said. Yes. How bad is it? He set the document down. The senior partner has been my company's legal counsel for 6 years. Silence. Seulki. He looked up at the sound of his name. She had used it without thinking, the way you reached for something familiar when the ground shifted. This wasn't an external attack, she said carefully. Someone let them in. Yes. Someone you trusted. Yes. He said it evenly, but she heard what was underneath it. Not shock, because she suspected he had trained shock out of himself years ago, but something quieter. The specific weight of betrayal that came not from surprise but from confirmation. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't think he wanted it, and she didn't think empty words were something either of them had patience for. Instead, she said, "This is also what stops the press conference." He refocused. Explain. Soo-jin's narrative depends on no counter-evidence existing publicly before she speaks. But if this filing becomes public first, if it establishes internal conspiracy before she can frame it as an outside attack, she loses the press conference before she opens her mouth. He looked at her. You need to release it now, she said. Before 10. We release it, we show our hand. You show your hand anyway the moment she takes that podium. She held his gaze. The difference is whether you walk in with evidence or walk in to respond. A long pause. You think like an investigative journalist, he said. I think like someone who has spent 11 years controlling how a story looks before anyone else sees it. She picked up the filing. Same skill, different medium. Something settled in his expression. Decided. Junho, he called. The corridor door opened immediately. Junho had clearly been listening. Already drafting, Junho said. Linda looked at him. Were you out there the whole time? I needed to make a call. You were listening. I was nearby. Junho. He almost smiled. You're good for him, he said simply. Then he went back to his laptop. Linda turned back to Seulki. He was watching her with the filing away look. Except by now she knew it wasn't documentation. It was something he didn't have a word for yet. Neither did she. The document release went out at 8:47. Junho handled it. 3 journalists, 2 regulatory contacts, 1 financial crimes unit that had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence for considerably longer than anyone had told Linda. Within 20 minutes, the subsidiary filing was being verified. Within 40, 2 news desks had confirmed they were running it. Soo-jin's press conference was in 73 minutes. Linda stood at the window of Junho's apartment, watching the city, and feeling the particular tension of having done everything correctly and still not knowing how it would land. It's enough, Seulki said from behind her. You don't know that. The evidence is clean. The chain is documented. The timing is... I know the evidence is clean. She turned. I found half of it. She crossed her arms. I mean, I don't know if it's enough to stop her. Evidence doesn't always stop people like her. Sometimes it just makes them more dangerous. He looked at her steadily. You're scared. I'm realistic. You're allowed to be scared. Thank you. I'll add that to the list of things I'm allowed to do in my own life. His expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Your sarcasm gets sharper when you're worried. My sarcasm is always this sharp. It gets faster. She opened her mouth, closed it. He wasn't wrong, and the truth was, underneath the sarcasm, underneath the competence, she was tired of pretending the last 5 days hadn't cost her anything. Fine, she said quietly. I'm scared. A beat. I know, he said. So am I. She looked at him. That was possibly the most surprising thing he had said since "you're late." You hide it better, she said. I've had more practice. Junho appeared from the back room with his jacket on and the expression of a man with a schedule. Car is ready, we should move. He looked between them. We're going to the press conference. Linda stared. Sorry, we're going. You suggested walking in with evidence rather than responding, Sulky said. That applies to presence as well. I meant releasing the documents before she spoke. I didn't mean physically showing up. It's more effective. It's also the location where a woman who wants us both silent will be standing at a podium with cameras. Yes. With security. Junho has handled the security consideration. Linda looked at Junho. What does that mean? It means, Junho said carefully, that 3 of the security personnel on site are known to me personally. Known to you how? A pause. We trained together. Linda absorbed that. You're a very particular kind of person, Junho. Thank you. That wasn't entirely a compliment. I know. He held the door open. Shall we? The press conference was held at Han Group's headquarters, a tower of glass and deliberate authority in the center of the city. They arrived with 8 minutes to spare, which Sulky apparently considered comfortable and Linda considered deeply insufficient. The lobby was controlled chaos, journalists, cameras, assistants moving in tight clusters. The kind of organized pre-event energy that Linda actually knew well. She had photographed enough of these to read the room. She read it now. Soo-jin's people were everywhere. Subtle, earpieces, positioned near exits, tracking movement. Not security, exactly. Management. The kind that made problems disappear before they became visible. One of them clocked Linda within 30 seconds of their arrival. She watched him reach for his earpiece. We've been seen, she said quietly. Expected, Sulky said. He wasn't looking at the man. He was looking at the podium being adjusted at the front of the room. Stay close. I wasn't planning to wander. Linda. His voice dropped, just slightly. Close. She looked at him. Something in the way he said it, not an instruction. Exactly. Something with more weight than that. Okay, she said. Soo-jin arrived at the podium at exactly 10. She was immaculate, composed, dressed in the particular way of someone who had decided how this story would be told and dressed for the final frame. She surveyed the room with the camera-ready calm of someone who had never lost a public moment in her life. Then she found Linda. A flicker. Barely anything. But Linda had spent 11 years photographing moments people thought no one was catching. She caught it. Soo-jin's eyes moved to Sulky, held there. And something passed between them that Linda couldn't fully read. History, calculation, the particular weight of 2 people who had underestimated each other at significant cost. Soo-jin looked back at her prepared remarks. Ladies and gentlemen. Sulky's phone lit up. Junho, from 3 feet away, already had his out. The news desk had published. The room began to shift. Journalists checking phones, murmuring. The particular ripple of a room receiving information that changes the context of where it is standing. Soo-jin felt it. Linda watched her feel it, the almost imperceptible pause, the recalibration behind the eyes. She kept speaking. Of course she did. People like Soo-jin didn't stop. They pivoted. Recent malicious claims. Ms. Han. Sulky's voice was quiet. It carried anyway. The room went still. He moved forward. Linda stayed with him, close, as instructed, as chosen, and felt the shift in energy as 300 people recalculated who was in control of this moment. "You should have checked the timestamps," he said. Soo-jin's composure held. "Just. Mr. Lee, you're interrupting. You planned this 18 months ago." Even. Unhurried. "The subsidiary filing confirms it. The legal counsel confirms it. The catering modification order confirms it." He stopped at the edge of the press line. "You're not a grieving fiancé. You're a defendant." Silence. Then, controlled, precise, devastating. Soo-jin smiled. "You brought her," she said. Her eyes moved to Linda. "How romantic." "She found the evidence," Selkie said. "You should have worried less about me and more about her." Something crossed Soo-jin's face, not quite fear, but adjacent to it. Linda held her gaze and said nothing. She had learned, from 11 years, from 5 days, from one very intense Korean man standing beside her, that sometimes silence was the sharpest thing in the room. The cameras were still running. Every word was on record. The aftermath was not cinematic. There was no single moment of collapse, no dramatic arrest in front of the cameras. What there was, lawyers appearing from 3 directions simultaneously. A regulatory official Linda hadn't noticed in the room making a phone call that lasted 45 seconds and changed everything, and Soo-jin being escorted, not in handcuffs, not yet, but with the particular firmness of people who were not giving her a choice about direction. She walked out, composed. Of course she did, but she didn't look back. And Linda had learned enough about her in 5 days to know that not looking back cost her something. The room emptied in stages. Journalists filed out fast, already writing. Soo-jin's people dissolved, some following her, some simply gone, the way support structures disappeared when the weight they were holding collapsed. Junho made 4 calls in 12 minutes and looked grimly satisfied the entire time. Linda stood in the middle of the emptying room and felt the particular flatness that followed sustained adrenaline. Not disappointment, not even relief yet, just the sudden absence of the thing that had been holding her upright for 5 days. Seol-ki appeared beside her. "It's done," he said. "I know. The Financial Crimes Unit has the full file. The internal counsel has been flagged. Soo-jin's family holdings are frozen pending investigation." "I know." A pause. "Are you all right?" She considered the question honestly. "Ask me in an hour." He nodded. Like that was a completely reasonable answer. Like he would remember to ask in exactly an hour. He probably would. Junho drove them back. Nobody talked much. The city moved past the windows and Linda watched it and thought about Atlanta, her apartment, her studio, her clients who had cancelled, the ones who hadn't, the life that had been running without her for 5 days while she was busy surviving someone else's war. "I need to go home," she said. Neither man responded immediately. "My clients, my contracts, my life." She looked at her hands. "I came here for a 3-day shoot. I've been here for 5 days and I own the clothes on my back and a camera bag." "Your contracts can be restored," Seol-ki said. I know you'll fix it. That's not the point." Silence. "What is the point?" he asked. And this time it wasn't the efficient question it had been in the surveillance car. This time it was careful, like he was asking something larger and using small words. She looked at him. "The point is, I don't know what this was," she said. "Any of it. And I need to think somewhere that isn't a safe house." He held her gaze. "All right." Just that. No argument. No variable management. It landed harder than an argument would have. Junho found reasons to be elsewhere for the next hour, which Linda appreciated more than she would ever tell him. She packed what little she had, which took approximately 4 minutes, and sat on the edge of the bed in Junho's spare room, and thought about the past 5 days with the methodical honesty she usually reserved for editing her own work. What was good? What was not? What she would do differently? She wouldn't have done anything differently. That was the problem. A knock at the door. "Come in." Seol-ki stood in the doorway, jacket off, the version of him she had come to know better than the alter version, less performance, more person. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You owe me several." "Yes." He came in, sat in the chair across from her, the same configuration as every conversation they'd had in small rooms over 5 days, and somehow entirely different. "I involved you without your consent. I kept information from you. I managed you like a variable when you were—" He stopped, started again. "You were never a variable." She looked at him. "I know that, now. I should have—" "Seol-ki." She said his name the way she had learned to say it, without thinking, without ceremony. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I fell for you," he said. "Somewhere between the altar floor and the timestamps. I'm not certain of the exact point." Linda stared at him. "That," she said, "is the most you thing you have ever said to me." "I'm aware it lacks—" "No." She shook her head. "No, it's—" She almost laughed. "You investigated the timeline of your own feelings. I wanted to be accurate." "Of course you did." "Linda." "I fell for you too," she said. "Somewhere between you handing me coffee at 6:42 in the morning and telling me you were scared." She met his eyes. "For what it's worth." "It's worth a great deal," he said quietly. The silence that followed was the most comfortable one they'd had. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, careful, deliberate, like a man who had decided something and was committing fully. No half measures, no almost. She let him. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "Not for the investigation, not for safety." A pause. "For this." "This doesn't have a name yet," she said. "No, but I'd like to find one." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had said "you're late" from the floor of his own ruined wedding, and meant it, who had handed her coffee before delivering bad news, who had said "so am I" when she admitted she was scared, who had investigated the timeline of his own feelings and presented the findings directly because that was simply how he was built. "I have clients to reschedule," she said. "I know. And I need actual luggage. I've been wearing the same rotation for 5 days. I'll have someone—" "I'll handle it." She squeezed his hand once. "But yes, I'll stay." Something moved across his face that she had never seen before, unguarded, unmanaged, simply and completely there. She picked up her camera from the bed beside her and took the picture. 3 months later, Linda Taylor had a studio in Seoul, not instead of Atlanta, in addition to. This had been Diane's idea, presented at high volume over video call approximately 48 hours after Linda had called to say she was staying. Diane had said, "You need a base, not a suitcase," and then spent 22 minutes researching Seoul's studio rental rates while Linda was still processing the first sentence. The studio was small, good lit, in a neighborhood that smelled like coffee and street food, and had exactly the kind of light in the late afternoon that made Linda want to photograph everything. She had 3 new clients already. A 4th was pending. Life, it turned out, was remarkably good at reorganizing itself around decisions you made on the floor of someone else's ruined wedding. Soo-jin's case had moved through the regulatory process with the particular efficiency of evidence that was simply too clean to argue with. The Financial Crimes Unit had been thorough. The internal counsel had cooperated, quickly, completely, in the way people cooperated when the alternative was considerably worse. Soo-jin herself had said very little publicly since the press conference, which her lawyers had presumably advised, and which Linda considered the smartest decision she had made throughout the entire affair. Junho had sent Linda a single text when the final filing was confirmed. Resolved. Good work. She had shown it to Seol-ki. "That's the most effusive thing he's ever sent anyone," he said. "That's genuinely concerning." He included a period. He doesn't usually punctuate. Linda stared at the text. I want to frame this. The betrayal conversation had happened 3 weeks after the press conference. Not in a safe house, not during a crisis, just an ordinary evening in Sulki's apartment, which Linda had decided was too sparse and had been incrementally improving without asking permission. She had been hanging a print on the wall when she said it. You knew I'd see what others wouldn't. He had been quiet for a moment. Yes. You didn't arrange for me to be there, but when I was there, you made a calculation. Yes. She had kept her eyes on the print, straightening it. That's the part I needed you to say out loud. I know. A pause. I'm sorry, Linda. Not for the outcome. For the part where you didn't get to choose. She had turned then, looked at him across the room. Sparse walls, careful man, someone who had spent so long managing every variable that vulnerability required a running start. I would have chosen it anyway, she said. That's what makes it complicated. I know that too. Stop knowing everything. I can't. It's a condition. She had laughed despite herself. He had crossed the room. And that had been the end of the rupture and the beginning of something with considerably better furniture. Diane visited in month 2. She arrived with 2 suitcases, strong, opinions about Korean skincare, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting 3 months to assess the situation in person. She assessed it in approximately 90 seconds, Seul-ki opening the door, Linda appearing from the kitchen with coffee, the particular ease between them that couldn't be performed. Diane looked at Linda. Linda looked at Diane. Okay, Diane said. Fine, I'll admit it. Admit what? Korean Twitter was right. Seul-ki looked between them. I don't understand the reference. You don't need to, Linda and Diane said simultaneously. He accepted this with the equanimity of a man who had learned that some variables were not meant to be solved. Junho took Diane on a tour of the city the following day, which nobody had planned and both of them categorically refused to discuss afterward. Linda had approximately 40 questions. She kept them to herself. Some threads were better left unpulled. On a Saturday morning in month 3, Linda was editing in the studio when Seul-ki arrived with coffee and the expression of someone who had something to say and was organizing it. She had learned to recognize that expression. She saved her work and waited. My mother wants to meet you, he said. Linda looked up. Okay. She has opinions. About what? Everything, loudly. In a way that I find, he paused, difficult to manage. You find your own mother difficult to manage. She doesn't respond to logic. Seul-ki, she's your mother. She responds to love. He considered this. That's the part I'm still learning. Linda stood up, crossed to him, took the coffee from his hand and set it down and looked at him in the particular way she had learned to look at him, past the composure, past the management, at the person underneath who was trying his level best and succeeding more than he knew. Good thing you're practicing, she said. Something moved across his face, warm, certain. He reached up and tucked a locky behind her ear with the careful deliberateness of a man who still treated every point of contact like something worth paying attention to. You know, she said, normal people say I love you without it being a research project. I researched it, he said. The conclusion was straightforward. She waited. I love you, he said. The data was unambiguous. Linda laughed. Full, real, the kind that came from somewhere deep and warm. I love you too, she said. No data required. Outside, Seoul moved through a Saturday in autumn. In the studio, the light was exactly right. She didn't reach for her camera. Some moments were better lived than captured. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe. New stories drop every week. And comment below. Were you Team Linda from the altar, or did she have to win you over? See you in the next one.